Welcome to Level Up Mechanics. In today's video, we're going to be upgrading the front brakes on my 8th Gen Honda Civic. We're going to actually be doing the Acura TSX front brake upgrade. It is a 100% bolt-on upgrade for all trim levels of the 8th Gen Honda Civic. So whether you have a DX, an LX, an EX, or even an SI, this is a budget-friendly upgrade that'll improve braking performance. I believe the only prerequisite that you need in order to install this upgrade is 17-inch wheels, so that way they can clear the brake calipers and rotors. So in today's video, we're going to be installing PowerStop brake rotors, calipers, and pads designed for an 04 to 08 Acura TSX. In addition to that, we're also going to be installing stainless steel brake lines for the front brakes from StopTech. If you do have any questions about this install, please leave them in the comment section below and I'll get to them as soon as I can. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and install some bigger front brakes. So here's everything that I'm going to be installing or using today to upgrade the front brakes on the Civic to TSX brakes. And if we start from the left, we have our PowerStop Evolution brake pads, and then we also have our cross-drilled and slotted TSX brake rotors from PowerStop. These are directional, so they're going to have the front driver side, and then you're also going to have the front passenger side. And then over here I've got some brake cleaner just to help with the cleanup and any mess that gets made during the process, and some Honda genuine .3 brake fluid. And here we have the powder coated red brake calipers from PowerStop. It's included with the kit, including all of the hardware and everything that you need to install the calipers. The calipers are also directional, so you'll have a driver side and a passenger side. And one easy way to indicate what's what is that the brake bleeder screw is always going to be pointing up. So that will indicate which side is the driver's side and which side is the passenger side. And then we also have some disc brake caliper grease, some synthetic grease for the guide pins on the calipers in case they're not greased during assembly. We'll take these off in a moment just to check. And then also we have some stainless steel brake rotor screws that I'll be installing onto the rotors. Those will replace the original ones that are currently on the vehicle. Here we actually have a brake fluid tester, and I'm going to test the current condition of my brake fluid because I have no idea when the last time it was changed, just to see how bad the brake fluid condition is in as far as moisture is concerned. And then here we have a brake bleeder bottle just to help during the bleeding procedure to keep everything as clean as possible. I also have a new tool, and this is an impact screwdriver that we'll use in order to break the brake rotor screws off. And this is going to be very helpful in regards to removing the old rotors and installing the new rotors. And last but not least, we have a pair of stainless steel brake lines from StopTech. So I will also be replacing the factory rubber brake lines up front with these stainless steel brake lines. Most of these parts, if not all, have been purchased off of Amazon, so I'll provide a link in the description below to each and every one of these items that we go over today during the installation. That way, if you're interested, you can check out the prices and see about the availability for the items on Amazon. Alright, first thing we're going to do is test the brake fluid. I do have my brake fluid tester tool right here. It does require a AAA battery, just one AAA battery, which is not included. So make sure you have a AAA battery on hand. But all we're going to do is remove the cap. My brake fluid is a little bit low, so I'm going to see if I can get to it. Looks like I will need to remove this little catch thing that's in here if possible. Alright, and all we're going to do is remove the cap on the tool. We're going to press the button once for it to turn on. You notice that the battery light is green, which is good. We stick it in for like 1 second. And if you could tell, it was less than 1%. which means that it was in pretty good condition, even though it is a little brown. Let's do it again. It shows it as 1%, which is an okay condition. Not a lot of moisture found in the brake fluid, which is a good sign. And one more time, just for good measure, 1%. So we are good as far as the brake fluid is concerned, although we will be flushing it out and installing new brake fluid during this install process. I'm going to leave this little screen out for right now, so that way it makes it a little easier to top off the brake fluid during the brake bleeding procedure. But I am going to put the cap back on to make sure nothing flies in there, because you want your brake fluid to be as clean as possible. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is remove these brake rotor screws, and we're going to take our impact screwdriver and we are going to insert it into the screw, twist left, use a hammer, put some torque on it, lefty-loosey. And now we have our screws loose. So the next thing I'm going to do is unbolt the wheel speed sensor from the knuckle. I do apologize. The neighbors seem to be using some sort of industrial lawnmower to do their lawn. But should be a 10mm bolt on the back side right here for the wheel speed sensor. May have to wiggle a little, and there's the wheel speed sensor. I'm just gonna move this kind of out of the way for the time being. And then next up, we're going to remove the 12mm bolt that holds the brake line onto the shock assembly. I'm going to twist the caliper towards me so I can get to the caliper bracket bolts. But before I get to the bolts for the brake caliper, I actually want to see if I can break the brake line loose back here in order to disconnect the brake hose that connects over here to the body of the vehicle. Here is a better look at the brake line itself. I did loosen it using a 10mm wrench. It is pretty loose. It's held in by a clip right here. So all we need to do is to remove the clip. You can use a flat-bladed screwdriver or a little pry tool in order to pull or pop the clip out towards you. After this clip is removed, then the brake line will be disconnected from the brake hose. Make sure you don't lose that clip. Mine just went flying off. All right. All right. Now the brake line is disconnected. We can remove the brake caliper and the brake rotor. In order to remove the brake caliper, you're going to have two 17mm bolts on the back side that connect it to the knuckle. There's two. And there is the entire brake caliper along with the hose. We took it all out as one piece since we're replacing everything. The next step, which should be pretty easy, is to remove the brake rotor. If you find your brake rotor seized onto your brake hub, just give it a good couple whacks with a hammer, and that way it'll disconnect it from the brake hub. It's usually just due to corrosion or rust buildup. But mine is easily removable, so that's a plus. So now that we have everything removed, as far as the TSX brake rotors are concerned, I do not think they're actually going to clear this brake dust shield. So I'm going to test fit it first, but I don't expect it to work. I expect the brake dust shield to actually rub on the rotor, at which point I think I may need to actually remove the entire dust shield. The TSX front brake rotors definitely touch the dust shield all the way around, so I'm going to need to remove the dust shield or modify it. Alright, and just for fun, let's go ahead and weigh the OEM rotor that's been used for I don't know how many miles, and the new TSX rotor to see what the weight difference is, because the weight difference does come into play to unsprung weight and rotational mass, and I'm just curious to see what the difference is. Our stock rotor, which is 11 pounds. And here we have 17.4 pounds. So definitely a big difference, about 6.5 pounds difference between the stock rotor and the TSX front brake rotor. All right, next up, let's weigh the OEM brake caliper versus the TSX caliper. Now, I know this isn't gonna be completely 100% accurate because the TSX caliper won't have the brake pads installed or the brake line, but it looks like it was about 11.3. Got 11.3 pounds right there for the OEM brake caliper, and 12.5 for the TSX one, which is pretty good. We've got about 7.5 to 8 pounds that we're adding to the upgraded brake caliper and the upgraded TSX brake rotor. That additional weight will rob me a little bit of the horsepower that I currently have, but it shouldn't be much. I was expecting a much greater difference. So now that I've test fit the rotor to make sure that I could clear the dust shield, the next thing I want to do is test fit the brake caliper to see if I need to cut some of the dust shield off. Now that the brake rotor is installed, we can install the brake caliper next. It is very close as far as the dust shield is concerned. Right at the bottom where the lower control arm ball joint is, it's extremely close, but it is clearing. There's just enough space to where it's not going to rub. If I do have rubbing issues, it looks like that will be the first place to look, but I might get away with it. Might actually get away with it. Now it's time to just tighten down the brake caliper bracket bolts. Now that the vehicle's in neutral, I'm just going to do a quick rotation, make sure I don't hear any brake noise when I rotate. And so far, everything looks really good. I don't hear any scraping from the rotor and the brake dust shield. No scraping between the rotor and the brake caliper or the brake caliper bracket. So we should be ready to move on to the next step. So for the next step, we're going to install the brake pads and the brake hardware, and we're going to make sure that the brake guide pins on the top and bottom are lubricated with synthetic brake grease to make sure that we don't have any binding with our calipers over time due to heat, moisture, and corrosion. Here we have a 14mm socket and a 19mm wrench. Lift this guy up, and install some brake hardware. So we have our brake shims that will snap into place. Now we'll install the PowerStop brake pads. You want to stick the brake pad on the inside that has the brake pad wear sensor built onto it. If you stick it on the outside, then your brake pad wear sensor could potentially rub against the wheel while your vehicle is moving. So always take the brake pad that has a wear sensor on it and install it on the inside. Take the next brake pad that does not have a wear sensor built onto it and stick it on the outside. Alright, now that the brake pads and the brake hardware are installed, now we're going to check our guide pins to see if they're lubricated or not. It does look like they are lubricated. And I'm going to do the same for the top guide pin as well. Now that we've checked both caliper guide pins to make sure they're both lubricated, we will just tighten up the guide pin bolts on top and bottom to make sure that they are secure. Again, we'll use a 14mm socket and a 19mm wrench. Now that the rotor and the brake caliper are installed, the next thing we need to do is install the stainless steel brake line. So as far as the stainless steel brake hose is concerned, I'm going to start by threading the hose onto the actual hard line on the body of the vehicle, and then I'll secure it using that clip that we removed, and then I will guide the brake hose to the brake caliper. You want to make sure to thread the brake hose on by hand at first to make sure that you've got the threads correct and that you don't cross thread any of the brake line. Now that the brake hose is connected to the brake line, we can reinstall the clip by just pressing it in as much as possible and giving it a little bit of persuasion, tapping it in with a hammer. Now when everything is said and done, we will want to check the brake hose at this location and at the brake caliper. Once we're done bleeding and we do a test drive, we want to recheck these connections just to make sure that there are no leaks whatsoever. Next thing we're going to do is attach the hose back onto the front strut assembly with our 12mm bolt. And then finally, we're going to attach the stainless steel brake line to the back of the brake caliper. I'm going to take my banjo bolt with one washer. I'm going to thread it through this end of the brake line. Then I'm going to add my second washer, put that on the other end, and then thread the banjo bolt into place. Now that I've started the threads by hand, it is oriented in one direction only, and you'll notice that when you go to install the caliper. It's pretty simple to figure out, but now that I have the banjo bolt threaded by hand, I'm going to start tightening it using a socket and a wrench. Also, last but not least, I did forget to mention, make sure you reconnect your wheel speed sensor with a 10mm bolt onto the knuckle. That's the last step. So at this point, I'm going to repeat the process over on the passenger front side, and then we'll start the brake bleeding procedure. I'm going to gravity bleed both of the front brakes first, and then I'll pressure bleed them afterwards with the help of a second person. Alright, now I'm ready to gravity bleed both of the front brakes, and I have my brake bleeder kit right here that I got off of Amazon. It has a magnet on the back of it, so you can just attach it to the rotor so it's stationary. I have the hose connected to the bleeder screw on the brake caliper. So in order to gravity bleed, all I need to do is open up the bleeder screw with a 10mm wrench. And I'm just going to open it up a little, just a turn or two, in order to gravity bleed. And what's going to happen is the brake fluid is going to naturally find its way down and fill up the brake caliper and come out of the brake tube right here. As you can see, the brake fluid is now starting to come through the line. And while it's gravity bleeding like this, you want to make sure that the brake master cylinder doesn't go dry, so make sure to keep topping off the brake master cylinder while you're gravity bleeding your brakes. After about 5 minutes or so of gravity bleeding, we're pretty much done with that step. Now we're going to do the exact same thing over on the driver front caliper. That's going to do it for this video. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below and I'll get to them as soon as I can. Don't forget to subscribe as I continue to upgrade the 8th Gen Honda Civic, and make sure to smash that like button if you thought the information in this video was useful. I appreciate your time, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Later.